Today, I'm honored to be joined by Colin Campbell. Colin is a writer and director for theater and film. The short film he co-wrote and directed with his equally amazing and talented wife, Gail, Seraglio, was nominated for an Academy Award. But if you ask Colin, he'd first and foremost define himself as a father. On June 12th, 2019 at 10:45 p.m., Colin's children, Ruby and Hart, were tragically killed by a drunk driver. Colin was thrown into a grief so deep, he thought he would lose his mind. He found much of the common wisdom about coping with loss, such as grief is a private and mysterious process, and that the pain is so deep that there are no words, to be incredibly unhelpful. Drawing upon his own pain, Colin decided to take action, and he offered out a new path for processing pain that is active, vocal, and truly honors Ruby and Hart. In his new book, Finding the Words, Colin teaches readers how to actively reach out to their community, perform mourning rituals, and find ways to express their grief so they can live more fully while still holding on to the ones that they love close. Today's episode is dedicated to Ruby and Hart, and all I could hope for with today's conversation is to honor them in the best way possible. Finding the Words is available now. The link to order your own copy is down in the show notes. If you yourself are grieving, if you know someone who is grieving, or you just want to work on your own personal emotional intelligence, you need to go check this book out. Thank you for tuning in to the R20s podcast. Without further ado, Colin Campbell. When I talk to a lot of my peers who are around my age, and we're past the age of, oh, what do you want to do when you grow up? And the answer used to be, oh, I want to be center fielder for the Yankees and stuff like that. Now it'll be like, oh, where do you see yourself in 5-10 years? And I'll answer, oh, I just really want to be a good dad. And they'll be like, no, like career-wise. And I'm like, yeah, I just really want to be a good dad. And I'll get some raised eyebrows, definitely, and some, oh, okay, you do you. But as of recently, within the past 2-3 years, really, that's kind of been my main focus in life is how can I set myself up to be the best dad possible? Because I think it's one of the most noble and the biggest act of love is just being a really good father. Did you always know that you wanted to be a father, or was that something you came to later on in life when you maybe had some experiences and you were like, this is the path that I want to go down?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I didn't want to be a dad until I met my wife.
Oh,
And so when I fell in love with my wife, that's when I wanted to be a dad. I wanted to be a dad with her and make a family. So yeah, that's when it hit me.
it's definitely
Yeah.
something that I think when I meet the right person, I'm single, I don't have a girlfriend or anything, but I feel like when I meet the right person and I know it's the right time, it's something that I'm really looking forward to. And it's always something that my parents tell me is that, oh, you can't describe the love that I have for this is them talking to me. They're like, oh, you can never understand the love that we have for you. You only understand when you're a parent. Can you try to share
Yeah.
just a shred of wisdom? Because a lot of the people who are going to listen to this are in their 20s. They're probably not parents yet. But is
Mm.
there any way that you can try to contextualize the love of a parent to someone who's not a parent?
Yeah, that's a good question. As I get older, it becomes clearer and clearer to me just how central it is to my sense of identity and meaning and purpose in life.
Right.
So when my kids were killed, when Ruby and Hart were killed, I always knew I loved them more than anything in the world. But when they were gone, when they were taken from me, that's when I viscerally felt it. Right. That's when the sort of my beliefs were confirmed, because that's all I care about is just the aching for them to come back into this world. So so yeah, it's the idea that they're more important than I am.
Yeah.
And that's kind of hard, I think, to think about in your 20s, because you're kind of supposed to be thinking about yourself and self-centered, and that's healthy.
Yeah.
But then as you grow older, I think the rewards you get from having a family are just so huge. Yeah, it's hard to explain, I guess, as you
Yeah.
said. But
Absolutely.
yeah, it's about seeing another human being grow and experience the world, um, and you're there with them, providing them with these experiences. It's pretty
Yeah.
extraordinary.
It seems to me as an outsider, the most extraordinary
Mm.
thing that we can do in this world is just really give yourself over to somebody else in a way that you never really have before. Even
Hmm.
when it comes to a partner or your parent, it just seems different, and it seems exciting,
Yeah.
but there's also, exactly like you talked about, um, there, I don't want to call it a risk, but there's always that thought in your head of, what if this love was taken away from me? And
Hmm.
Ruby and Hart were tragically killed. And I want to be
Mm.
very specific about word choice throughout this whole podcast. And Ruby and
Yeah.
Hart were killed, and it was not an accident. It was a car crash. A drunk driver killed Ruby and Hart, and that type of pain, I can't even begin to contextualize. And I think that's where a lot of people will start to falter in terms of finding the words, is they will try to
Mm.
contextualize something themselves that there is no possible way that they ever could, without ever experiencing it. And I think us as humans, we try to empathize the best that we can, but the more that we grow, the more that we feel safe in kind of escaping empathy, where we try to kind of put a cap on it, and we'll say, okay, they'll figure it out themselves, and then we can do whatever
Mm.
we need to by ourselves, almost to escape it, as someone who's trying to comfort someone that we know that might be grieving. And
Mm.
that can make it really difficult, for the person who is grieving, when they can feel alone. And from reading the book is so powerful, as I said before we even hopped on the podcast. And one of the parts of the book that struck a chord with me immediately is when you were describing how the day after they were killed, you started writing down every little detail of the experience and how it made you feel. And
Mm.
to me, writing is one of the most powerful things that we can do, in terms of just understanding our emotions, because sometimes it feels like when we're talking to ourselves in our head, that we don't really understand it. But once you put it on paper, you can start to contextualize it more yourself and kind of understand your emotions maybe more than you did beforehand. Can you
Hmm.
just describe the
Yeah.
process that you had to undergo when you were writing? Was it
Yeah.
kind of just stream of consciousness, you weren't even thinking as you were writing, or did you have to kind of stop yourself from writing it sometimes because there were too many emotions being expressed at one time? uh, what did that feel
Well,
like?
well, the specific act of writing down all the events before and after the crash, that right away, that was really sort of a kind of a special writing exercise, a sort of a dangerous one, I think, because that was trauma. So I was in a car crash that 90 miles an hour hitting me, and so and my kids were killed, and it's so traumatic. And when you have that kind of an event, there's a real danger, PTSD,
Mhm.
and of re-traumatizing yourself. And so I kind of knew that instinctually, that I wanted to get that down on a piece of paper so that I could uh, I could in a way leave it behind. I didn't have to keep replaying the crash over and over in my head, searching for an answer, which I
Yeah.
think it happens to a lot of people when they have a sudden death, when they experience that of a loved one. Your brain automatically tries to find ways of fixing the situation, of making it so they're not dead, and that's just a powerful impulse of denial, that your brain just is going to do no matter what.
Yeah.
And you can get stuck in that loop, and I definitely was. I definitely still do spend a lot of time in that loop, but I think I managed to spend a lot less time than I would have if I hadn't written it out, and been able to sort of, as best I can, let that go,
Yeah. Absolutely.
because I knew that if I didn't have it all down, I would be questioning myself. Wait, no, what exactly happened? How could I have not had that car crash happen? How could have things been different? And they can't. You can't change the past. It's already happened, right? So,
Yeah.
so that was really an exercise in trying to avoid denial,
Yeah.
getting caught in those loops. But
Yeah.
to your other point about the how helpful it is to write in general, in order to understand my emotions and understand. I agree with you. Understand and process, these big things. So I journaled every day for the first year after the crash, and that was more like stream of consciousness. That what you were
Yeah.
talking about, where I just sort of wrote out whatever was coming to my mind, and also just literally writing down what happened that day as a means of just, I think, as a means of kind of tracking myself. Because I think in acute grief, it can really feel like you're stuck.
Yeah.
like nothing's changed, nothing will change. I'll always be in this moment of acute pain and despair. And writing what happened each day was also my way of, I think, um, reassuring myself that I was moving through grief. I wasn't just, stuck and hopeless or helpless.
Yeah.
I was processing it, bit by bit.
Yeah. For me, when I used to journal, this was a year or two ago, and I stopped because I was lying to myself every time that I was journaling. I wasn't journaling
Oh,
accurately. Try to do, I would switch it up every now and then. I would do affirmations one day, and then I would just do a general overview of my day. And as I would go back and I would read it, I would quite literally say to myself, I'm lying. Like today was
wow.
not this sunshine and rainbows day that I tried to make it. And these affirmations that I'm trying to write down of all these things that I'm grateful for, I don't feel grateful for them. I'm lying.
Hmm.
And it was at that moment that I
Wow.
started to realize, okay, maybe this doesn't work for me. And I started shifting away from writing to actually saying it out loud. And I started with my parents, and it got easier and easier just to talk to my parents about the emotions that I was feeling and helping
Wow.
really to contextualize them and stop suppressing them like I had been for so long. And
Hmm.
I think that's an issue that a lot of men typically deal with is the suppression of emotions, where we get taught at a really young age that, oh, you can't be the one who's crying. If somebody passes away, you have to be the rock for other people to look to and show that everything's going to be okay. You have to be that simple. Or if you're in pain,
Yeah.
don't show any pain on your face. You can never let anybody know that you're hurt. And I call BS absolutely on all of that. Where I think the more that you suppress your emotions, the less that you understand yourself, and the more harm that you're doing than you are good. That you could be passing on to somebody else to show them that it is more than okay to express your emotion. And in fact, it's a great thing because the more you understand the emotion, the more you can understand who you are as a person, and the more you can understand other people. Why do you
Hmm.
think it is that men in particular, even now, I think there's a real change in the conversation where a lot of men, especially my age now, are starting to be much more open. I think mental health conversations are much more prevalent than they used to be in schools and athletics that I've seen, even in the
Yeah.
workplace now. Now that I've gone on to more of a corporate type of setting, why do you think that we still struggle though, especially in terms
Hmm.
of the ones that we love the most? We struggle to face them, and we still choose to suppress ourselves around people who are supposed to be the ones that will build us up in all kinds of situations.
Yeah. Yeah. I think maybe two things are going on. I'm just thinking top of my head here, but I think that um, one is just a natural fear that everybody has of discomfort.
Yeah,
I think so many of life's poor choices are the result of people being afraid to feel the pain, the emotional pain. I think people who are drinking themselves numb or taking drugs to be numb, or any other way that we numb ourselves to the pain of life, is a way of trying to avoid it, right?
yeah,
And just we're more scared of it than we need to be. Um, things that feel unbearable aren't. We can bear them, it turns out. Um, and the other thing, though, I think is for me and masculinity, the idea of like I can handle it. That in fact, I think we're told from a very early age through films and maybe even books the idea that handling something difficult means you do it on your own.
yeah,
You don't need someone to help you because you're tough enough that you can handle it. But what handling it usually translates into is just stuffing it into a box
yeah,
and not actually experiencing it. Um, and so, yeah, I think we're given these mixed messages. Like I keep thinking about now, I'm very aware of how grief is portrayed in film, and so often you'll see a really tough character, and they lose someone dear to them, and they just drink themselves to death, or they just get extra angry, and it's like that's not really processing your grief, dude.
yeah,
You're just avoiding it, and it's not so tough, is it? If you're
yeah,
just running away from your pain. Um, but yeah, but so often the tougher the character, the literally the more they'll drink
yeah.
in response to
Literally,
grief, and the less they'll talk about it.
yeah. I can think of numerous examples off the top of my head of movies, just even in the past couple of years that I've seen, where grief isn't depicted correctly. And
Mm.
I think the juxtaposition of even the quote that you use in the beginning of the book is taken from Macbeth, which
Right.
let's ballpark it. I think 1600 is a safe estimate to say when Macbeth was written. And
Yes.
then Shakespeare even
I should
knew
know.
that you can give sorrow words. That you can't let the aching heart just sit idly and not express what's going on because you will
Yeah.
absolutely destroy yourself inside. And
And those are
yeah,
warriors, by the way, who are speaking those lines. They're
yeah,
soldiers. They're
yeah.
soldiers who are saying that. Yeah.
I think the important context because I know a lot of kids don't read anymore. They definitely haven't read Macbeth. Um, it's so true though. Where how can we go from a place in 1600 where we're more emotionally intelligent now to the 21st century where we're supposed to be more understanding than ever, but we still can't get this one concept right? And it seems that
Mm.
Hollywood, especially and other forms of art too, right? Theater hasn't gotten this right, expressing human emotion. That's what acting is supposed to be about, is the best depictions of human emotion, and that's what we're supposed to marvel at actors for, is
Mm.
for their expression of human emotion. But still we can't seem to find it. As someone yourself who is actively involved in theater and film and teaching it, do you think that we'll ever get to that point where we can shift to using art as an expression of proper human emotion again? Or do you think it's something that might just get lost with the times in favor of more corporatized, okay, we're gonna play it safe here. We're just gonna go and do the play this way, we're gonna go do the role this way. And we're
Mm.
not too concerned with accuracy, and we're not concerned with the damage that it may be causing for the example that we're setting.
Yeah. Well, I think part of the reason why I think Hollywood likes to depict the tough guys just drinking themselves is that maybe it appears more compelling because they're making a poor choice,
Yeah.
so they're suffering as a result, and maybe that's more compelling than somebody actually engaging in the work of grieving, and staying healthy, I guess, as they move through a difficult chapter in their lives.
Yeah.
So there's always that. There's like the let's show people falling apart, but uh, but I think that it would be compelling to see characters actually grappling with their grief. So often you see characters sort of at the very beginning of dealing with their grief. So the film or the TV series ends with a moment where they start to say, "Okay, I'm going to actually grieve now." Um, so maybe it's dull to see somebody grieving. Actually, I don't know, um, but but yeah, I hope to see I think more nuanced depictions of grief.
I hope to see it as well. But I think it translates to the idea of grief being this mystery, as you allude to in
Mm,
the book, where the
yeah,
character's getting ready to grieve and they say they're going to do it, and then they cut to black, and then we don't actually get to see
right.
what goes on because it's this individualized process, and it's a mystery as to
Mm,
how everyone grieves. And I think that is one of the leading contributors, as you identify yourself, as to why we can't seem to find the words when it comes to trying to be there for someone who might be going through the grieving process. And as we
mm,
said at the beginning, word choice is really important when it comes to trying to empathize with someone or help them get through the time and let them know that they're not alone. And I'm
mm,
guilty of it myself, where my go-to phrase is "There are no words,"
mhm.
and and you you have a really good just kind of skit in your play where you're you're saying that someone comes up to you and they shake your hand and they're like, "There are no words." Yeah. Yeah. Just kind of going back and forth. And what good does that do for anybody? And it's the same kind of
Yeah,
thing where maybe we'll think, okay, I got it. It's all part of God's plan. Or they'll say something like that. And you're just like,
right.
what kind of God came up with that plan? Like, that's a horrible plan. Or they'll say something like, oh, I
Yeah.
would just die. If I were you, I would have just died. And you're saying,
Mm,
well, what kind of person would I be if I just killed myself or I gave up on life right now? How would I be honoring anybody? And then maybe they don't
right.
even use words.
Right.
Maybe they're like, "Here you go, Colin. Here's some booze. Here's some pot. Go for it." And you're
Yeah.
like, "That is
Yeah.
the thing that just killed my children," and that's what they're
Right.
giving to you. And it's this just lack of understanding and the lack of being able to contextualize,
Mm,
which I think is absolutely detrimental to
yeah.
our ability to help people who are going through the grieving process. And what I think is funny is how you highlight too in the book that it's the children that are the ones who are able to express their words the best, where they'll come up
Hmm.
to you and they'll have amazing stories about how Ruby and Hart were just the best people, how they were always so kind and they were so willing to just help anybody. And they would share these amazing stories and they would say, I'm going to miss them so much. And adults seem to think that that's not the correct path to take when it comes to
Yeah.
expressing grief.
I think
What if,
adults have the
yeah,
misapprehension that their job is to somehow fix the person who's grieving, or take away their pain,
yep,
or try and make them feel less pain. And that's when it gets dicey, because the only way that you can do that is to minimize their grief by
yeah,
either saying that it's part of God's plan, or that it's all going to work out, or that um, you'll have other kids later, or whatever it is. You'll marry
yeah,
somebody else, whatever it is. They're trying to put a positive spin on it as a way of minimizing the grief, and it's never going to feel good to somebody who's grieving, because that person needs to express their pain. They don't want their pain taken away, because you can't
yeah,
do that. And I think that's, a very useful message to get out there, is that, because in a way it relieves the person who is trying to help somebody who's grieving. By letting them letting them know that they're not going to help them. And so they're going to help
right,
them by being there and bearing witness to their pain. So it kind of lets you off the hook in a way, right? In a good way. It's
yeah,
like, you don't have to say the perfect thing. There is no perfect thing. Just be there for that person, and let them share. And then if you know the person who died, you can share stories. As you said, you can share stories about the person who died.
yeah,
Um, that's really all we can offer people in grief.
yeah.
And
We
that's a
definitely,
huge thing to offer.
yeah, absolutely. We definitely do try to play the fixer role in everything, I think, as adults,
Hmm.
where I think we confuse empathy with, oh, I need to repair this. I need to fix this up, or otherwise I'm not doing my job. And maybe I don't really know how to fix it, so I'm just gonna put a band-aid on it, and we're gonna walk away slowly and awkwardly.
Right.
And I think it ties into not understanding human emotion again, where we think
Mm.
it's our job to fix, and we're like, oh, wounded bird mentality. I have to swoop in and I have to be the one who saves the day. That's not always the case. Sometimes you just need to be there, and that's the best thing that we
Yeah.
can do. And I think what you do, especially with the grief spiel, is amazing, because
Uh,
sometimes people just aren't going to understand. They won't have the wherewithal to be able to ask, "What do you need?" Or they'll feel
mm.
distant, or they feel like they can't reach out to you to begin with. And it shouldn't be something that has to fall on the person that's grieving, like, okay, I have to get up now and I have to tell everybody what's going on. But until we get to the point where we can commonly understand each other, I think this is a pretty good solution to be able to help people see, hey, I do want you to be here in some capacity, and I would like it if
Mm.
you did this, and I also would really like it if you did not do this. So
Right.
can you just talk about how the grief spiel, it evolves over time. It's not something that stayed
Mm.
consistent from day one to day 365 and beyond, but
Yeah.
it evolves depending on the situation, the person that you're talking to, and just how you noticed it being effective in the situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for asking. I'm not Jewish, but my wife is Jewish, and we raised our kids as Jews. And um, part of my experience as a mourner was leaning into the Jewish traditions, because I didn't have any traditions of my own family traditions. We didn't have any grieving traditions, so I really relied on the Jewish, customs. And so what I discovered while sitting shiva, which is people come to your house each night for a week after the funeral, and my wise rabbi asked us if we wanted to talk to the people who were gathered, and it turns out we did, and that was really amazingly helpful,
Yeah.
to be able to tell Ruby and Hart stories, and also share about my grief to this community. And so I learned how important it was to talk about grief and grieving and Ruby and Hart. And then when people came to my house after Shiva, they were pretty panicked, because they didn't want to say the wrong thing. They
Yeah.
didn't want to remind me of my loss, or, somehow offend me or make me upset. So they didn't really know what to say, but I needed to have conversations. I needed to have friends be able to not be walking on eggshells around me. I wanted to have real conversations. And so that's when we discovered this idea of what we call the grief spiel, which is we tell these people, our friends, what we need in that moment. And as you said, it changed over time. It changed, hour to hour, honestly.
Yeah.
Um, in acute grief, you can go through all different um, states of mind in one day. But it was so helpful to tell people what we needed. And it's so contrary to like the social contract. It feels strange to tell people this is how we need to interact. You know what I mean?
Mm. Yeah.
But it's so helpful. It was so helpful to us and also our friends. And they immediately responded. They were so grateful because they didn't know what to say. They didn't know what was going to really upset us, and they wanted to help us, but had no idea. And so as you said, it seems hard to have the burden be on the griever. And I think a lot of people in grief, they, if someone is not asking them the questions they want asked or is not behaving the way they want, it can be so easy to get bitter. You know,
Yeah.
like why don't they come over more? Why aren't they calling me? Why aren't they offering to go for a walk with me? My God, we're such close friends, and this terrible thing has happened to me. Where are they?
Yeah.
And I think it's hopefully my book encourages people in grief to reach out and tell people their needs, and not that everybody's going to give you what you want, but I feel fairly certain that most people's friends are going to do right by them, you know.
I think
um,
especially the ones that are the best of friends and the good friends. I think the
mm,
ones that can't seem to understand after hearing you tell them what you need, I don't think they were maybe that good of friends to begin with in the first place. And maybe
yeah,
it's just an indicator that they're not at an emotional level that they need to be in order to remain friends with you. And again, these are all tough conversations to have. These are all tough decisions to make as to whether or not we want to keep people around, especially during these difficult times. But
yeah.
it could be for the
But
better.
I
Though.
found
Yeah.
even people who couldn't give me what I wanted, they still wanted to give me something. And
Yeah.
so I really tried not to write off anybody, even the people that just couldn't. I would think of them as being limited in their ability to engage in grief.
Yeah.
But they still love me. They still love Ruby and Hart, and so I still love Gail, and so I still wanted them in my life. I still want them in my life, but I just learned to get the more important conversations with other people.
Yeah.
I think I just sort of calibrated, like these people are limited, but they still love me. So um, I still want that continuity of friendship,
That's very
because
wise.
they knew Ruby and Hart.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's very wise. And I think it just shows my is it naivety or how naive I can be?
naivete.
Yeah, naivety to to say, oh, just cut them off because I think a lot of people in my generation are quick to cut others off
I
at the
think
first
every
sight of
I think
difficulty.
every generation is quick to, I think I
Yeah.
felt that way too. Like, oh, forget them.
Yeah.
But uh, but I've also come to appreciate community in a new way.
Yeah.
Um, and so I really value all my friendships, even the ones that are a little grief limited. Yeah.
Yeah. During the morning sessions, did the reaction from the community surprise you in any way? Just the overall turnout, especially I mean at the school there was a huge turnout when you would do even
Yeah.
private morning sessions. The turnout was large. Did it surprise you in a
Yeah.
way that just to see how many people were caring and willing to sacrifice their time just to truly show that they wanted to be with you?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I remain constantly surprised in a good way at just how my community has shown up for me and Gail and Ruby and Hart.
Yeah.
There was even just, Hart's high school. So his class is graduating high school now.
Oh
So
wow.
he never made it to high school. He was killed at the end of eighth grade.
Yeah.
Um, and this year, so it's almost 4 years later now. Um, his class, they held a chapel for him, the whole high school. So in front of the entire high school, his friends read poems about him, played music, told stories, and grieved. They wept in front of their entire high school community. And I thought, my God, this is extraordinary.
That's beautiful.
Their friend died almost 4 years ago, and most of the kids in the high school have never met Hart because they were younger. They didn't know him.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yet here they all are honoring Hart and and being emotional, openly emotional. And I thought, when I was in high school, I couldn't imagine doing that or being part of that. You know, being that open, being that emotional in front of my peers. It was so beautiful and extraordinary. But they wanted to do this. You know, hold this ceremony in honor of Hart. It was very
Wow.
beautiful, very beautiful. Uh,
I'm,
yeah,
I mean, I don't think I could picture myself doing that at 17, 18 either. And
yeah,
that was only 5 years ago for me when I was 17, 18. I just wasn't that kind of person then. I still don't think I'm that kind of person. I find a lot of faults in myself when it comes to understanding my emotional intelligence and truly showing care. And that's the ultimate display of love, in my opinion,
mm,
is just being so open with how much they care. That's such a beautiful thing because
yeah,
one of the topics that I kept thinking about while I was preparing for this conversation is acceptance as a whole, and
mm,
how I kept thinking about the idea of the world where Ruby and Hart where Hart's graduating high school. Like it's a dream. It unfortunately is never going to happen, but it shouldn't be a dream. That's
hmm.
something. And I was having a conversation with a trauma psychologist on the show. Her name is
Oh,
Dr. Mary Catherine McDonald. I reference her all the time now in these episodes because the conversation was so impactful and so many
oh,
things just
amazing.
transfer over. And one of the topics we talked about was moral injury, is how she referred to it as. And it's this
Mm,
idea of when your view of the world completely shatters, but it's not because of some pipe dream of something that has never been and most likely never will be, but in a situation where it should be. And you see it around you in every other instance. 99 times out of 100, this is how it happens. And then this is the one scenario where it doesn't happen. And how do you go about accepting that? And
mm,
I just want to get your opinion on acceptance as a whole, because I think
mm,
that is one of the hardest steps for people to find joy after intense periods of grief, or just after maybe on a different scale of disappointment, failure is we struggle with acceptance. And again, with word choice, how would you define acceptance in the first place? Do you think it's a definitive action to take where, okay, this is the line that I have to draw, this is it? Or do you think it can be more abstract where it's good to still want Hart and Ruby to be here so badly, but you know
mm.
that it's best for them if you go on with your life and you continue to honor them the best way that you can?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. Um, I feel like acceptance is something. For me, it's not accepting that it's. You know, I talk about in my book a little bit about the idea that I used to think acceptance was I'm okay with it. Like, okay, I'm accepting this. I'm at peace with it. And I don't think I'll ever be at peace with Ruby and Hart being murdered
Mm,
by a drunk driver. I no, I won't. But what my journey is to accept reality, is to
mm,
literally accept the truth that they are dead, and that is very hard. And it goes back to denial. So that's sort of an ongoing journey. You know, there's a part of me that still doesn't really believe it. It's almost been 4 years now. But, you know, June 12th is when they were killed, so it's just 2 weeks away.
yeah,
Um, and but but I don't like living in denial. I don't like denial. I don't like fantasizing that they're still alive because it just feels unreal to me. That's and ultimately it all falls apart, right? It's not real. I'd rather live in reality. Um, so as hard as that is, so for me, it's sort of an ongoing thing. It's not definitive, like, and now I accept it
yeah,
because it's not so easy. I know there's a part of me that doesn't, but but I feel like it's worth engaging in it and engaging with my denial so that I can accept this reality that I'm in right now.
yeah. And
Because that's
it's
how I can find joy. Like you said, that's where you
yeah,
get joy,
yeah.
not in a fantasy, but in reality.
And one of the most impactful parts for me of your writing was how you talk about the relationship of pain and love, where if you don't fully embrace the pain and acknowledge the pain, then you're doing yourself a disservice of acknowledging the love that you have for Ruby and Hart.
Mm,
And by leading away from that, we're talking about how to honor them and make sure that they live on. And if you refuse to lean into the pain, then you will never fully acknowledge the love, which I think is very profound and very powerful. And
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
ties in
You
again
can't.
to, yeah, go ahead.
Well, you can't even. I mean, if I can't think about a beautiful memory of Ruby and Hart if I'm too scared of the pain that's going to cause me.
Yeah,
Um, and so I want those memories. I want to think about them. So I have to lean into that pain.
yeah. Can you talk about the relationship of guilt with forming
Mm,
new memories, where w- keeping Ruby and Hart at the forefront of every action that you take and always making sure that they're a part of your actions and a part of your memory, but at the same time knowing that moving on to new aspects of life doesn't mean that you're letting go of being their father, and it's not
right.
something that you should be guilty over. And in fact, it's one of the biggest acts of love that you can do is to continue living
Mm,
uh, in honor of them. Can
yeah.
you just talk about overcoming any sense of guilt that might come from wanting to move on?
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. I think overcoming is a little bit too optimistic a term, but
Yeah,
I think just trying to deal with that guilt,
yeah,
I think it's never, it doesn't ever go away. Um, but I try not to dwell in it. I guess that's what I've sort of learned is that it's going to come up, right? Oh,
yeah,
how can I be laughing? Ruby and Hart were murdered, and here I am, I'm laughing. And it's like, well, Ruby and Hart loved good jokes. They loved dark jokes.
yeah,
And so, how can I not laugh? Because that's part of them. It's part of me because of them. They changed me, right? They're in me because they helped shape me,
yeah,
helped shape the person I am today. Um, so yeah, my laughter, it honors them, um, even though it's still hard.
yeah. I wanted
Yeah.
to talk about laughter, actually, where I think people confuse laughter with just being an everyday, typical type of routine. But it really is an art form in a way of making
Hmm.
yourself laugh and making other people laugh, where all good jokes contain true facts about life. And it's looking at it through a different lens than other people might not have looked at it before, whether that's through juxtaposition or through setting the joke up and then getting to the final punchline. And I think especially with jokes that are kind of planned out, we think to ourselves sometimes, especially in a situation like yours, you're like, how could he be joking about that? Like that's
Mm,
ridiculous. But art, as we touched upon before, art is one of the best ways for humans to express their emotion and to channel these
mm,
emotions into something that can be healthy, where instead of having this intense rage and having a rampage and being disorderly in the world, we can channel
mm,
that rage, we can channel these emotions into art, and we can use it in a way to, first of all, educate, and then second of all, I don't think healing is the, again, being particular with word choice,
mm.
not healing, but finding solace. I think solace is the better word, and I think solace is a word that you use throughout the book too.
I do. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
When
I
it,
like
when it comes,
solace.
yeah, when it comes to laughter in particular, how do you walk the line so that you are using laughter to express these emotions in a healthy way, but you're not
Mm,
going too far as to cross over to a line where maybe you're spiraling down and you're thinking of all these memories of, oh, I could have started to do things differently. I shouldn't have to be writing these jokes. If only I had done something differently on this day, then I wouldn't be
mm.
here. And it falls more into that period of despair that you also talk about in the book.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think for me, the humor, the tricky side of it is it can also be avoidance.
Yeah.
So like you don't, it's something, it's a rough topic of conversation, and you use humor. I use humor to deflect, to like, sidestep real emotion.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the struggle for me. Am I joking around because I don't want to feel the pain, or am I joking and feeling the pain? Um, uh, yeah, that's my personal sort of thoughts about my own joking.
Yeah.
When am I using it to not engage in the tougher conversation?
Yeah.
But my solo show, my one person show, has got a lot of very very dark jokes,
Yeah.
um, and they actually cross the line for sure in terms of inappropriateness. But uh, but I think that the whole show is very very much engaged in grieving, so I
Yeah.
think it's all right.
I I think it's all right too. I think everyone is entitled to a good inappropriate joke every now and then, and especially like you said, Hart
Yeah.
loved inappropriate jokes. So
Yes,
doing
he
our best to
did.
on yeah.
Yeah.
When you're teaching now,
Mm.
is there anything that you try to pass along in your lessons? Maybe it's not to direct them, your students, as to how they should go about uh, directing their actors or planning out a theater production, but just is there anything overall in terms of life advice that you try to pass through over to your students, in terms of just emotional intelligence and helping them understand the world better?
Yeah. Well, I think more about mental health now than I ever did.
Yeah.
Um, I think about their struggles with a lot more empathy. I was always empathetic. I wasn't like a jerk as a professor, but now I think I have a deeper understanding of some of the struggles that they're facing. Just because grief is grief, pain is pain.
Yeah.
And so I always encourage them to talk about what they're struggling with, and to get engage with it, as opposed to trying to compartmentalize it or box it up and pretend it's not there.
Yeah.
Um, that's that's the I guess the deeper wisdom I share now. But uh, yeah, but in terms of creating theater and film, I was always pushing them, my students, to be engaged in the difficult things, in the things that bother them, as opposed to the cool idea that they have. Like they see some amazing Hollywood movie and then they want to write their own sort of rip-off version.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what does this have to do with your life? What does this have to do with your problems? And can you write about things that actually matter to you personally? Because then we'll care more about them. We, the audience, will care more,
Yeah.
as opposed to the super groovy idea.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I think doing the uncool and being vulnerable are some of the best things that you can do. And as I
Mm,
read the book,
yeah.
that's all I could think about when reading the stories that you shared of Ruby and Hart, is how you passed that advice down to them too, and it was evident. And I wanted to finish up today just doing the best that we can to honor them, and I wanted to
Oh,
just share some stories about them, that you shared in the book. And if you don't mind, I would like to start by reading a passage from
oh,
Ocean, which was
oh,
Ruby's
yeah,
personal essay. Um,
yeah.
to quote Ruby, finally, I come up for air once again, strengthened by the oxygen rushing through my lungs. I wonder, will the next wave come? It feels both inevitable and impossible at the same time. If, when it hits me, will I go under again? Will I struggle for air against the ancient rage of the sea? Or will I swim fast and strong, slicing through the last wave to the place beyond the breakers? Will I float on my back under the summer sun and listen to the waves crash in the distance? This will be a peaceful life, a good life. I will only have to brave one more wave. I see it approaching, slowly building, and so I swim forward to meet it, the taste of salt on my tongue. And when I read that, I immediately thought of grief as a whole, and how grief can come in waves one at a time, and how we have to be strong to embrace that grief and to lean into the emotions that we talked about. And for Ruby to be so young and to so beautifully display these emotions, it's just really impactful. And combining that with a story that I heard, your rabbi was sharing, actually, where Ruby, I think they were on a school trip, and she was saying that the two young boys were stuck out in the surf, and
Yeah.
Ruby actually swam out to go get them. And she looked them both in the eyes, and she said, "You're going to do what I say, and you're going to come with me right now." And she braced the surf, and she went out there, and she was strong, and she didn't shy away from the waves. She went into them, and she was able
Yeah.
to get them back out in safety.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I, I taught her about rip currents and rip tides, and how you don't swim against them because you get tired out. You swim, perpendicular to them. And she spotted those two kids out, and she saw that they were being pulled further out to sea, and they weren't aware of it. And so she she turned to the teacher who was there, chaperoning, and said, they're caught in riptide. You need to get them in. And she's like, oh, I'm not a very good swimmer. And this is Ruby's like in ninth grade. She's like, okay, then I'll save them. And she swam out to save these kids who were like in sixth grade, and pulled them ashore because she knew what she was doing. And she was a very powerful swimmer.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The I love that essay that you read. She was 16 when she wrote that, and it was for her about her OCD. It was a metaphor for struggling with OCD and taking it one wave at a time. And now for me, it's a metaphor for grief. And I just love how it ends. It ends with her, you know, leaning into the pain, right? She's
Yeah.
swimming out to meet it. She's not just letting it hit her. She's actually swimming out to be hit by the wave.
Yeah.
Um, and that's such a beautiful sentiment.
It really is.
Um,
And I honestly teared up when I read it because I was trying to think of put myself into my 16-year-old shoes.
hmm,
I couldn't have expressed emotions in that type of fashion, and I certainly couldn't have come to terms with what I was feeling at the time. And just to know that she was able to do that, and she was able to pass that along to her peers, and they loved her so much.
hmm.
It's just truly powerful. Um,
Oh, thank you.
it really is. And
Yeah.
with Hart, hearing all the stories about how he loved to make people laugh and how he always chose to be kind, which I think a lot of kids they love to be mean, and they think it's uncool to care. They think it's uncool to be kind. Um, but Hart proved
Mm,
that that's not true. How just
yeah.
being kind to anybody and everybody, they don't have to be your friend. They could just be someone who you come across in the hallway and you see them crying and you say to yourself, I'm going to go help them out. And that can absolutely change somebody's world, and it can make somebody's day. And can you just talk a little
Hmm,
bit more about Hart and talk about what you've helped
yeah.
set up at the school, just to honor him?
Yeah. Well, he was always like the life of the party. He was funny. He was like a homebody. He would always be like, I don't want to go out. And then he would go out, and then he would have the best time, and he would literally be the life of the party. And he would always be surrounded by a throng of kids. People just wanted to be near him. He was just magnetic that way, both he and Ruby. But he had he had such a sense of presence, and he was always making fun of not making fun, but making funny characters, and so make people laugh. Um, and he was never mean spirited about it. Um, his jokes were never putting other people down.
Yeah.
They were more like a goofy, inappropriate jokes. um, yeah. And so the incident you were talking about, that a girl wrote about how um, she was crying, she was having a terrible day, and Hart was just walking by with his friends, and he left his circle of friends and came and sat with her and said, "Do you want me to make you laugh or listen?" And I love that he was so confident that he could make her laugh. It's such a thing. Like, you want me to make you laugh? As opposed to like, oh,
Yeah.
and he could. He absolutely could. He could make you laugh. Or do you want me to listen? Because he knew that maybe she wanted to talk. So beautiful.
Yeah.
And she chose to laugh, and so he made her laugh. um, and then he popped back with his friends. It was just like a thing. It's just that's just what occurred to him to do.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and his circle of friends were a beautiful mixture of gay kids and bisexual kids and straight kids, and they were all sort of navigating this, potentially complicated um, uh, sphere because it's middle school. Everything's charged, right? This is the this
Yeah.
is the era where you get picked on, right? Um, and they were all together navigating it so beautifully. And he was such an amazing ally to his sister. She was gay, and very proud of it. And he was an amazing ally for her, and that was beautiful too. Yeah,
Just the confidence. Again, putting myself in my eighth grade shoes, I'm
right.
still not confident in myself, and sometimes I feel like I don't do enough in terms of trying to be there for other people. And
Yeah.
I know that you'll say that they did it themselves, but there's certainly an aspect of parenting that comes into that too. And thank you for
Thanks.
sharing their stories and letting us all hear them. Um,
Yeah.
it truly did touch me. And the one part, it's so small, but it touched me so much when I read it. Is that you said every time that Hart would get dropped off at school, he would always make sure to say that he loved you before he
Okay.
left, and it touched me so much because when I went to school, so my dad worked at the school that I went to, and
Uh-huh.
up until literally up until I would leave high school at 17, 18. There wasn't a single day that I wouldn't just give my dad a big hug, tell him I love him, tell him to have a great
Oh
day.
wow.
Um, and I try to stick with that to this day, where I don't get to see my parents every day. I don't even get to see a lot of my family anymore. But no matter what kind of conversation that we're having, whether it's the best of conversations or we just had a huge argument and we're all still really mad at each other, I always make sure that we reconcile at the end and I say I love you, because I never want the last conversation that we have to be anger or some form
Yeah.
of malice. And to me, finding joy after grief is just leaning into love. That's the message that I got from it, and I think
Yeah.
love is that one. I don't even know it's an emotion. It's just a force in this world where love can fight through anything, and it will always be able to fight through anything.
Hmm.
And thank you for just showing us the power of love through your writing, um, through your ability to continue talking about all this. It's so important to me, and I really hope that anyone who's listening on the other end of this is going to get the same level of value that I did. Um, Thank you.
Nice.
And that's all. That's all I can really say.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Once again, a massive thank you to Colin for allowing me the privilege of having this conversation. And once more, this episode is dedicated to Ruby and Hart.